Thank you everybody for joining with us today. We're going to get started in a minute or so. If everybody could please make sure that their mics are muted, as well as making sure that the name that appears on your Zoom account is the name that you prefer to be called and includes your pronouns. If you're just tuning in, please make sure that you are muting your microphone as you log in and that you have changed your Zoom name to reflective of the name that you would like to be called and that it includes your pronouns. So welcome, everybody. We want to thank you for joining in with us today. Just one last time, if you're just joining us, please make sure that you have your microphone muted. You can do that by just hovering over the screen and clicking the mute button. Also, if you're able, please make sure that the name next to your participant abbreviation is the name that you would prefer to be called and that it includes your pronouns. Because we have such a large group today, we unfortunately don't have time for formal introductions for everybody in the group. And so this way we want to make sure that we are referring to you in the way that you prefer to be referred to. And Clarice and I want to welcome you to Antiracism 101 for Educators. Clarice and I are part of the Racial Justice Organizing Committee. And I'll turn it over to let Clarice introduce herself.
Hi y'all, I'm Clarice Brazos. I teach here in the city of Philadelphia. I moved up here about 4 years ago from I love living here in Philadelphia. I do a lot of work with the Racial Justice Organizing Committee and the Melanated Educators Collective.
And my name is Blair Downey. I am finishing up my 6th year in the school district, and before that I was working at a charter school in the city. I work at Harding Middle School as a school-based teacher leader. I'm a Temple grad who recently got their master's in ed leadership, and I am also a core member of the Racial Justice Organizing Committee.
So a little bit about the Racial Justice Organizing Committee. We are a group of mostly educators, but also community members and parents of students, the School District of Philadelphia. We meet at least monthly. Recently, we've been meeting a whole lot more than that. We organize actions around ending white supremacy and improving the treatment of children of color, especially in the School District of Philadelphia. Right now, we're really working towards increasing the number of teachers of color that we have in our school district. And this training that we're doing today is really just a tiny part of a much larger 20-hour anti-racism and anti-bias training.
So as we move through this session, we are going to do some collective note taking. And so I'm going to put the link for the Padlet in the chat box for everybody. If you're unfamiliar with Padlet, it is kind of just a digital bulletin board where people can go in and add comments and notes and pictures. Give me just a second. So if everybody could go ahead and open the Padlet. As you're moving through the training, if you have any thoughts that you want to share with the larger group, or if you have any questions that aren't answered as we move through the training, please add them on the Padlet. You can do that by clicking the little pink plus sign in the bottom right-hand corner of that screen. And that way we are going to download the Padlet as a PDF, address any of the questions, and send that out to everybody along with the recording of the training at the end. So again, we did not expect such a large group when we posted this, and so we want to make sure that everybody has a way to have their voice heard, and this is our solution. So we'll make sure to address any of those questions and send out all of the notes and the recording to everybody at the end.
So these are the objectives that we would like to try to address today. We want to identify and define racism and anti-racism. We want to identify the way that we see racism really in schools and what we can do to address that. And then we want to talk about some actions that you can take, hopefully over the summer, to combat racism in the communities that you are living and working in.
So we have some norms that we use as a collective group and that we always use with our training. And so we're just going to read them out loud. At the end, if there's something that you think that should be added that's missing here, please feel free to add that in the chat box. Our first norm is to own any discomfort that you may experience and not displace it onto others. Accept and expect non-closure. Be present and avoid unnecessary technology, which is something we definitely designed before we all spent our lives on meetings on computers. Know when to step up and step back. Seek first to understand rather than judge. Be curious and try asking open-ended questions. Understand that growth comes from a place of discomfort. And try not to make assumptions about others' experiences and whether they align with your own. So if there's anything that you think is missing, please feel free to add that in the chat box so that we can lift it up to the larger group.
So why we really started working on this training, this is something that grew out of our work during Black Lives Matter Week of Action, which if you don't know about Black Lives Matter Week of Action, it's kind of a week of events where we focus on the 13 guiding principles of the Black Lives Matter movement and how we could incorporate those into our schools. So the rationale for this is that race and racism are an unavoidable topic of conversation right now, but historically these have been very under-discussed topics. We believe that ending racist practices helps break the cycle of racism, and we really feel that as educators, it's our responsibility to increase our own understanding of race and racism and help other people and our students be able to have these conversations.
So some things that we just want to go over before we dive headfirst into the training is just some things that folks, especially white folks, should know before talking about racism. For many, this experience or experiences over the past couple of weeks might have been the first time that these conversations were addressed in your professional setting. And so it's important to have these understandings to move forward in a way that's productive. So it is uncomfortable to talk about race. Colorblindness, colorblindness, especially as an educator, is a cop out because you have to see people and who they are to understand their experiences. Oprah's success or the success of any other Black man or woman does not mean that racism is over. Segregation in our schools, especially and in our communities in Philadelphia, we know that there are people tuning in from all over, but we see this all the time. Segregation is still rampant. Black on Black crime is not something that should be used as a rhetoric. People of color are angry about racism and have every right to be, but it's not their job to teach you about what's going on. And so we thank you all for tuning into sessions like ours. There are poor white people, but that doesn't mean white privilege doesn't exist. Silence doesn't do anything, but action is important. Let new information drive you towards action, which is why we're going to end this training with a whole list of actions that you can join, regardless of where you are, to support what's going on.
So we wanted to get started with just kind of a foundational definition of what racism is. Racism is the belief which assigns innate thoughts, actions, and characteristics to a group of people based on their race or ethnicity that affirms the perceived superiority of another race or ethnicity. This superior race, which in our country is white people, also wields unyielding political, economic, and social power over the perceived inferior race or ethnicity. So a really simple definition that we use, this is the definition that I use in my classroom with my students, is prejudice plus power plus white supremacy equals racism. And then we have the definition for anti-racism, which is why you are all here today. Anti-racism consists of strategies, theories, actions, and practices that challenge and counter racism, white supremacy, inequalities, prejudices, and discrimination based on race. So Angela Davis really kind of coined this phrase, and most recently, Ibram Kendi has been doing a lot of work around what it means to be an anti-racist. So we'd like you to take 2 minutes to kind of reflect on the video and think about these questions. Have you been non-racist or anti-racist kind of in your life in general? And also if you're an educator, in your practice as an educator. How does the information provided and the views that Marland expresses make you feel? And what does it make you think about? And what is really happening in your school or your setting? After 2 minutes of reflection, we're going to use the raise hand feature. And if there are a couple of people that want to share, we'd love to hear from you.
Right, and so about 30 seconds, I do see a couple of people who have raised hands. I'm going to ask them to unmute, and please just try to keep your shares around 30 seconds if possible. right, Kristen, I think that I see that you have your hand raised.
Yes, thanks for calling on me. I am a non-racist working very much toward being an anti-racist, and I feel like the more that I know, the angrier I get. And this summer so far, I've been really, really angry. So I'm trying to find a way to channel that into positive change rather than just sitting around and being angry about it. That's not getting anyone anywhere. So I think that call to action really needs to go out to all educators, and anyone who's feeling these same conflicting emotions and anger need to figure out what they're going to do to make a change rather than just being upset.
Thank you, Kristen, for sharing. We're hoping that some of the resources that we're going to talk about today and share at the end, we have kind of like a summer to-do list of ways that people can get involved. And again, we know that not all of our participants today are local to us in Philadelphia, but hopefully these resources will be applicable regardless of where you are. So thank you for sharing that. Jordan?
Yes, hi. I think I have definitely been more non-racist than anti-racist lately. I'm a new teacher, I'm new to my school district, and it is a predominantly white school district, and I have been probably not speaking up as much as I wanted to, just to get my foot in the door, knowing that that foot in the door will hopefully give me a platform to do more active anti-racism work in the white community.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anybody else that is interested in sharing some thoughts about the video? Oh, I see a bunch of people just popped up. Okay. Mary and Diane.
So I will echo what others have said, and thank you for holding this webinar. In March, we were so fortunate to host Dr. Ibram X. Kendi at our school. And then the very next day, we got sent home and shut down, as rightly so, and I'm fully in support of that effort. But I feel a regret that we didn't have a chance to debrief with the 500 kids that were able to hear him speak, because he was amazing. But now that these events have occurred since then, our district has really stepped up, and we're having a Black Lives Matter Summer Summit as part of our Summer Academy for teachers. So I really feel like things are moving in a better direction than where they were kind of at a stall. And I'm hoping to spread Bar-We chapters at as many of our schools, hopefully all of them. We have quite a large district in the suburbs of Chicago. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks for sharing that. Our district in Philadelphia has stepped up in some ways that we have been asking them to step up for several years. And so it is definitely a time to kind of lean into the work, I think, as educators, because districts are making those platforms so much more possible for us. Hear from Nick.
Hi everyone, it's good to see you. Yeah, I guess I was reflecting on how during college and high school, I realized I thought I understood racism, and I thought that was enough to be not racist. And it was only after college that I began to really truly experience communities that took active work in their education, their activism, their policy work to fight racism. And I really think that without being in these spaces that modeled anti-racism work, I would not have been able to kind of start moving in that direction. And there's still stuff, I'm still trying to reflect on like where else I need to move to. But I realized that without seeing it modeled, I would have struggled to get there in any way, shape, or form. I'd still probably be passively supporting racism.
Thank you. it looks like Anna.
Hi, I work in a university setting, so it's a little bit different. But when I was watching the video and thinking about myself, I was thinking about how I feel like at a point I was non-racist, and I feel like I'm moving towards anti-racism, and that some of the I guess anti-racism is sort of built into the policies of my institution in terms of like reporting discrimination and things like that. But how much of that, I think I'm doing a lot of reflecting of how much of that is coming from the way policies are written versus what is our moral obligation by individuals. And so I think a lot of my reflection as of late has been about the work that needs to be done to actually change the way that the systems at our institution are set up so that they are supporting our Black students, and that it's just not that we are anti-racism out of obligation or out of the accreditation standards or things of that nature that are provided to us, but that we're doing it out of ethical and what's right. And so I think that that's a lot that I'm starting to question within myself too, is you know, where is the source of my own efforts? Like, where's my why coming from? And I think that that's been something that I've been really digging for more meaning with over the last few weeks.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's something that we talk about a lot in our group, is that even sometimes when the policies are in place, is the system really designed to support the people who would be doing the reporting? Or is it there kind of just like, yeah, something that checks the box? So we have time to hear quickly from one more, and it looks like Lizzie is next on the list.
Hi, everyone. So something that I was thinking about, especially in my setting, so I teach at a high school right outside of Philadelphia that does have like over 50% Black population, whereas most of the teaching staff is white. So I would say that for myself, through my master's program within like the last 5 years, I would say I'm like an aspiring anti-racist, and I'm kind of like started to move towards that direction. But what I'm interested in is taking a lot of my colleagues from that non-racist space into like being activated and being someone that is trying to learn more but also do more. So I think I work with a lot of people who work with kids of color and think like, oh, I'm doing my part, but it's actually really destructive what they're doing a lot of times. So how can I get my white colleagues to also be active participants in, you know, creating a school that is more anti-racist?
Thank you for sharing that.
So we've talked a little bit about these definitions of racism and anti-racism, and we've talked a little bit about being a non-racist versus being an anti-racist, and now we're going to talk a little bit about what some of you have brought up in this conversation, is what it looks like in schools and what educators can do to be more anti-racist. So these are some of the demographic breakdowns of the School District of Philadelphia. That's the context that we work in. Usually this information is available on any university website or any district-wide website. You can see that almost 50% of the students in the School District of Philadelphia are Black. About 9% are Asian, 22% are Hispanic, or Latinx, and then we have about 14% of our students who are white. We have less than 1% of our students who are Indigenous Americans and less than 1% who are Pacific Islanders. On the next slide, we're going to take a look at what our teacher demographics look like. So you can see that a majority of the teachers in our district are white, almost 70%. While 24% are Black, and about 3% of our teachers are Asian. So if you can think about kind of what these relationships might look like and what it means if 70% of your faculty is white and 70% of those people are probably not acting as anti-racist. And then something that I've been thinking a lot about recently, because I'm not sure that a lot of people think about this, is the percentage of the United States and what our racial breakdown looks like. 60% of people who live in the United States are white, and only 13% of people who live in the United States are Black. You can see the other breakdowns here. You have a little less than 6% of people who are Asian, less than 2% of people are Indigenous or Alaskan Natives. And then we have slightly less than 3% of people who are 2 or more races. The reason that Latinx people are not included on this slide, or that Latinx is considered an ethnicity and not a race. And so on the next slide, we're going to look at the population of people who are imprisoned. And that information that comes from the federal Board of Prisons, they do not include ethnicity and race on the same scale. So this is the racial breakdown of people who are incarcerated. This is only federal prisons. This does not include jails. This does not include any sort of state prison. So you can see that while I think obviously looking at the percentage of Black people who are imprisoned is very shocking, Indigenous Americans make up less than 2% of our country, but make up a whole 2% of people who are incarcerated.
And so as educators and in the group that we work with, we think about a lot about the part of our definition of racism that includes power, and always looking at what percentage of people has the most power, and is that representative of the overall demographics of an institution. And so we don't see that to be true in our schools especially, and we don't see that to be true certainly in the United States prison system. But we want to transition just a little bit. We ground a lot of our work in teacher testimonies and the experiences of our teachers and students. And so we have collected some testimonies from teachers and students in the school district of Philadelphia regarding racism that they've witnessed or experienced in their schools. And we just want to share some examples of what has been sent to us.
So we'll read a couple of these. I'll start. All of the students with an emotional support designation on their IEP are Black boys, every last one of them. White teacher at my school said to a Black student, a 6th grader, "Do I look like one of your niggas?" I asked a colleague about cultural relevant novel, and the reply from them was, "There was a Black person in Uncle Tom." About 3 years ago, I was told by a white colleague that one of my students of color would always be behind.
This one's a little bit longer, but a teacher submitted to us that there was a pair of young white teachers in their school who designated their lines in classroom groups using cute animal names. Several experienced teachers heard them use the term monkey as one of the names of students. Upon letting the teachers know that there were historical and racial issues with them using the term monkey to refer to Black children, the 2 staff members said that the students didn't mind and ignored the insight from the veteran staff at the school. About a week later, a Black staff member heard the students referred to as monkeys and went straight to the principal to complain about inappropriate racial language.
So we'd like for you to think about if these comments that we've shared from teachers in Philadelphia, and these are all comments that we've gathered in the last 2 to 3 years, do these reflect the things that you've seen or heard in your school or your district or your organization? And we'd like to hear about that. So you can use the raise hand feature like you did last time, and we'd love to hear a couple of people share.
All right, Stephanie.
Yeah. Hi, I'm a teacher in Newark, New Jersey, and yeah, I'm as a white woman educator. A lot of the things, like those sorts of examples, are said to me or in my presence in like maybe at lunch or in places where other people of color can't hear, and so, for example, one teacher was saying that talking about how students, in her opinion, have gotten less, um, not as bright, but over time, or they're not performing as well over time. And then she said, well, what do you expect? Garbage in, garbage out. And she said it in a context to where parts of Newark that are predominantly Black versus Latina or Latinx. When I talked to her about it, she said it wasn't racist because she wasn't talking about color. So yeah, I'm just finding most of my work, most of what I need to do as to be anti-racist is sort of addressing some of the things that come up that maybe people think they're smart enough. And this person would say she's not racist because I wouldn't even think she's not non-racist. I think actually there's a way more people calling themselves non-racist that are saying things like that, not because they think, like you said, that or that the video said it's a moral lapse. It's so that's the thing, the lack of awareness that it's systemic. And so if you are participating in it, you're part of the problem unless you're actively doing something. So
Thank you for sharing that. I can agree with the sentiments that as a white educator, I have been appalled by what other white educators feel comfortable saying to me that I know that they would never say in front of our colleagues or administrators who are Black, and learning how to interrupt those conversations in the workplace is a huge part of being actively anti-racist. Lauren, next, Friedman.
Hi. So just a couple days ago, I'm a white educator in a pre-K through 12 private school. And I think all of the white educators know that we could be doing better, but I think just a few days ago, a few of our students of color had a brown bag lunch where they invited faculty just to be observers, and they did the facilitating and the speaking. And it was so extremely eye-opening, and they were very candid in what they said. And a lot of them shared that they feel extremely uncomfortable being vocal in class because they don't want to come off as the angry Black woman, or because they don't think their white teacher will be empathetic to what they have to say, or that they'll just be dismissed. And so they have their white friends speak for them instead. And it really broke my heart, but it also made me think that I've been very naive in my perception of what goes on in my school. And that's why I'm here. Part of the reason why I'm here. So we all want to do better.
Yeah, and I think showing up to events like that, as someone who was a student of color in a predominantly white institution, seeing teachers at things like that makes a big difference. And I think even telling kids like, hey, I'm open to learning about what it is that you're interested in and how I can be a better partner for you goes a long way.
It looks like Heather is next.
Hi, K-5 educator in Washington, and mostly white teachers at my school. And we have one colleague who is a Black man, the only Black person on our staff. And this year during one of our lunch times, a para was talking about how when he first started working at that school, she was scared of him but couldn't quite put her finger on why. And then a couple other people chimed in saying the same thing. Oh yeah, I was scared of you too until, I got to know you. And so it was just kind of and then later we talked about it, just him and I, and he's like, see what I have to go through. And so it's kind of a very uncomfortable kind of thing. And I can't even imagine how he was feeling about that, because it's all these other microaggressions that he has to go through. So that was just something that happened at my school.
Thank you for sharing that. If we could hear from Griffin next.
Yes, hi, thank you for choosing me, even though I couldn't raise my hand. I just got really angry. I was substituting in a first grade class, and a little boy, a black boy, said to me, I was just talking to him about calming down a little, and he says, I have anger issues. And I just wanted to know, I got really upset, and I told him, no, you don't. You're just a little boy. And I really wondered where he heard that.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that something that I even see a lot in my own school setting is students really internalizing the language that's used about them, especially when it comes from adults and people in power, in a way that is really upsetting. If we could hear from Jamie Betts next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thanks for calling on me. So I've been non-racist most of my life, and in the last few years been working toward being anti-racist. 3 years ago, I brought to my high school staff information about power and privilege, white supremacy, and white privilege, and I had a staff member say white privilege does not exist. And I didn't have any other staff members coming alongside me to help push this forward. Then that staff member left our school, and last year we started the Bar Week curriculum, the Building Anti-Racist White Educators curriculum, and it's been mostly well received at my school, and lots of brave conversations and learning happening. But in the district, other educators found out about it, and I've been getting a lot of pushback saying that grouping people by race is the definition of racism, and we shouldn't be using curriculum that is just focused on white educators. I've gotten pushback from my district saying reverse racism is just as big as a problem. So as a new anti-racist, I am still struggling to figure out how most effectively to bring this to my school and my district as a whole. I'm definitely experiencing a lot of pushback.
Thank you for sharing that, Jamie. I experienced something pretty similar in my school building when we tried to do a book study about the book So You Want to Talk About Race a couple of years ago when it came out. And I would just like to tell you that you can feel free to reach out to myself and Clarice if you need some assistance with the phrasing of kind of addressing the other teachers in your district about that, and really just focusing on the importance of affinity spaces. So please feel free to reach out. We would be happy to help with that as well, or leave some questions on the Padlet and we can put some resources in our follow-up email. And we have one more person who has their hand raised, so we'll hear from them and then we'll move on. Robin?
Sorry. Hi, I teach high school English in a pretty wealthy suburb outside of Boston, and there are so many things, but I was trying to figure out what are the ones that are the most frustrating. And I think, for my district, part of it is the white savior complex and a lack of education, but just enough. Like, my administration team has taken like one course and they feel like they got it and are, superintendent is so proud of what they're doing, and they hired a diversity expert, and they're so proud of it. But at the same time, they are so afraid of being sued, and so they insist on both sidesing everything. And I think that complicates how we have these conversations, because I think that I know I freeze because I'm like, I don't know I can't both sides this. But that's in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think we see that a lot here in Philadelphia too. And I think everywhere people have to focus on the fact that you are never going to arrive, right? None of us have arrived. Like, I was doing research for this last night and I was like, oh, I never thought about that way. Or, oh, maybe I need to like be more reflective in this part of what I'm doing. So I think we all have to just remember that like this is a continuum and we're always trying to push towards being better. But white supremacy is so ingrained in our society that we are not going to fix it before the semester starts, and we're not going to fix it by the end of the next school year. It just has to be something that we're always working on and trying to improve.
All right. So I just want to take some time to appreciate everybody for sharing. I know that we certainly didn't expect there to be so many people here, and that sharing things that can feel really personal about your own experiences can be really challenging in front of 100 other people. So thank you to everybody who opened up. And please make sure that you're adding those thoughts and concerns on the Padlet, or that you're reaching out to Clarice and I. Our contact information will be at the end of the slide, because we would love to be able to follow up with you. Now that we have some working definitions, and we've agreed that these are things that are not only happening in Philadelphia, but things that we're seeing in school systems across the country, we know, and you know, that these are problems. So we're gonna talk a little bit about what we can do to begin eradicating these issues in our school systems especially. And we're gonna talk about what it means to be an anti-racist educator and some steps that people can take to begin that.
So we found an article, and this article will be linked at the end of the presentation. And the article is called How to Be an Anti-Racist Educator. It's by Dina Simmons. It's a very brief article, so we definitely think it's something that you can take back and share with your staff, share with other people that you know. So we're just going to kind of talk through these 5 points about some strategies that you can utilize.
So the first point is engaging in vigilant self-awareness and understanding that people who are white or who are viewed as white have more privilege and fewer barriers to resources than Black people or other people of color in the United States. And also really understanding as educators that it's Eurocentric values and content that dominate the US education system, and we rarely see intentionally diverse curriculum. And just some questions to ask yourself as you begin engaging in this self-awareness. How does your identity provide or prevent access to necessary resources? How does your power and privilege show up in your work with students, take up space, or silence others? What single narratives are you telling yourself about students? And how does that affect grading, behavior management, and other interactions? Do you, in the academic materials you use, uphold whiteness or lift up the voices and experiences of color? And these are not questions that you should be able to answer immediately. They're kind of questions to drive research and learning for yourself over the summer as we approach the beginning of another school year.
Okay, so next we have acknowledge racism and the ideology of white supremacy. I was just kind of talking about this. I think it's really important with kids of all ages to acknowledge the fact that we live in a white supremacist society. I know that when I was growing up, I don't remember anyone ever talking about this in schools, and it helps, especially students of color, to feel like they aren't broken and that they aren't doing enough, which I think is a common feeling for Black kids and students of color when they are in school. So if we are not acknowledging racism, we're really erasing the history and the culture and the identity of a lot of our students. And even if you teach in a predominantly white school where you don't have students of color, this is still really important to be teaching our students. Schools and districts are always feeding lessons on grit to students of color, that you need to work harder, that you can fix yourselves so that they can adapt rather than try to disrupt this system of racism. And then really talking about what race and racism are, even using that simple definition that we talked about at the beginning, is really important for all students and educators. So one way to do that is through teaching and studying representative history. It doesn't matter what you teach, being able to include African American history, which is US history, is really important. I think it is really important for Black kids to see themselves in ways besides what they just see on TV, or just seeing themselves as enslaved people or as someone who fought during the civil rights movement. And I do think that is important for Black students, but I think sometimes it is even more important for white students, because I think white students have a very narrow vision of what Black people can be, and that proceeds through the rest of their lives. So assessing your curriculum for representation, being able to identify bias, and making sure that you're not just giving your students a superficial experience.
The fourth suggestion is to talk about race with students. I think that we do ourselves, and especially our students, a disservice when we act like they don't realize that the only white person in the room is sometimes the teacher. Having conversations, the open conversations with our students help to build trust and prevent something like sending a message that it's wrong to kind of be in that situation, and just kind of addressing the elephant in the room by using stories from literature and history as a starting point, and asking students to take on the perspective of a character about whom they are reading, especially when you're reading about characters with diverse backgrounds and diverse experiences. And finally, and this is something that has come up a couple of times, as educators in the building, when you see racism, do something about it. I think especially as a white educator, I had mentioned that it seems like other white people in my building feel comfortable saying things to me about students or about the families that we serve or about other colleagues that they absolutely would not say in a public setting. And I think that that is a really easy one-on-one way to disrupt racist thinking in your school building. But we have to fight against racism and other isms and phobias. We have to consider how academic resources, policies, admissions, hiring, grading, and behavior management practices at school might be racist. And we have to have the courage to act, whether it's on the individual level, that one-on-one conversation with somebody in your school, or on a policy level by showing up to a school board meeting, or starting a petition with other educators, or writing to local council people, depending on where you are.
So this is a book that we really love, that we've used quite frequently. We Want to Do More Than Survive. This is a great next step if you have not read this book about becoming an abolitionist teacher. It's written by Bettina Love, and she's going to talk a little bit in this video clip about the difference between being an ally and being a co-conspirator.
Can you break down for us this difference between an ally and a co-conspirator?
Yeah, so
I bet you can.
So, you know, the book is about like this idea of abolitionist teaching, right? And so shout out to upstate New York. I'm from upstate New York. You know, we don't like New Yorkers, but that's okay. You know, when you're from upstate New York, like, where you from? You know, I'm from upstate. Queens? No. Brooklyn? No. Albany? No. I'm from upstate New York, Rochester, New York, 90 miles from Canada, right? And so, so we had abolitionists in upstate New York. That's where I grew up. And the one thing about an abolitionist had to be a co-conspirator. I mean, I want y'all for a second to just think about the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad freed over 100,000 enslaved Africans and Black folks, right? Think about this. There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook. There was no Instagram. This was all off trust and love of each other. And to say that this system of racism and bondage, no more.
Yeah.
We did that. It was everyday people. Farmers, bankers, doctors, teachers, nurses, all ethnicities. We did that as a country. Someone came to your door, gave you a code, you just had to trust them. And so I wanted to bring that back. What would it mean for us in 2019 to think about what it would mean to be an abolitionist and to be a co-conspirator? And in the book, I use James Tyson. Now, many people are not familiar with who James Tyson is. You know Bree Newsom. Bree Newsom was the young Black woman who took that Confederate flag down in South Carolina 8 days after Dylann Roof went into the AME church. And I tell the story in the book because I think this is an important story because Bree Newsom and James Tyson did not know each other. There were some folks who got together and said, that flag is coming down. They said, and a Black woman's gonna take it down. They taught Bree how to climb. They had Bree's bail money ready. And that morning, Bree Newsom and James Tyson were at an IHOP. They got the word, come take the flag down. Bree Newsom climbs up on the pole to take the flag down. Now, this is where the difference between an ally and a co-conspirator is. James Tyson, now there's a gate for the flagpole. James Tyson isn't standing like outside the gate. Okay, like Bree, they coming, Bree. Like Bree. No, James Tyson, he is inside. And then the police say, you know what? We can get her down. Tase the pole. James Tyson, because he wasn't here, he was here, said, okay. He put his hand on the pole. That white man at that moment understood why he was there. He put his hand on the pole and he knew that the police would not tase that pole with a white man, healthy white man, right there. He saved her life. That's what it means to be an ally. You can stand out there, and allies know all the language. They read all the books. They come to the meeting with all the terms. They read the report before you read the report. Right? I always say allies make Black folks so bad. Like, did you read the new Ta-Nehisi Coates book? I didn't read the new Ta-Nehisi Coates book. Like, you know, I've been busy being Black. Right? I didn't read the new Ta-Nehisi Coates book, but I know it's fire. Right? So they come and they know everything and they good. And then after the meeting, you're like, well, what we gonna do? They go, you're like, how they left already? Where they go?
I'm gonna call it Uber.
Right? So that's the difference between being an ally and a co-conspirator. You know, and this is that back to that abolitionist, is to put something on the line for somebody.
Yeah.
Take a risk to see how to use your whiteness. And I tell folks all the time, whiteness is like a bank. And it just, your ATM card just replenishes itself. So spend it. As the kids say, cash out. Right? Cash out. It's gonna come right back. And so to be a co-conspirator, I try to write in the book, is to take risks for somebody. To put something on the line, but to use it in a way in which when you're using it.
Dr. Love gives us a definition. Can you identify a co-conspirator that you've had in your?
Sorry, it'll take me a second to get back to the slideshow.
I just want to acknowledge some of the things that people said in the comments. Clarice had showed a picture of the book before we broke for the video. The book does go into more detail. Also, that entire interview is available on C-SPAN for free. If you just search Bettina Love, and it's about an hour and a half long. So if you want to see the rest of the interview, you can feel free to search that. And we are going to put a link in the chat box to a summer to-do list. It's going to prompt you to make a copy. It is a Google Doc. And if everybody could just open that up, we're going to spend some time kind of just running through the to-do list as we transition more into the actions that part of our training.
So Bettina talks a lot about taking risks and kind of pushing yourself, and we do think that that is an important part of really partnering with Black people and people of color as we all work together to dismantle white supremacy and racism in our country. These are a couple of steps that one of our colleagues, Hannah, put together. 5 concrete things that you can do this summer to act as an anti-racist educator. They are geared towards educators, but most of these things would benefit anyone. Remember that we must commit to continuous, sustained action in order to dismantle racism and white supremacy in our classrooms and beyond. So one of the things that you can do is you can join a summer reading group. We have 2 linked here. One is a series of book groups that we are running. Many of them are virtual here in Philadelphia this summer. Our colleagues at Building Anti-Racist White Educators are also running a summer reading series, and one of the books is We Want to Do More Than Survive. So if you enjoyed hearing Bettina speak, I'm sure that they are going to do an amazing job with that book, and it is a very worthwhile read. The next is to read at least one article from the resource guide. So we put together a couple of weeks ago a resource guide that's hyperlinked here of different articles and activities and things that you can do with your students as you're thinking about these uprisings that have been occurring in our country this summer. They go all the way down to pre-K and all the way through high school. Certainly any of those things could also be used at the post-secondary level as well. So we would encourage you to read at least one of those articles. We would encourage you to really read more than them, but starting with one would be a great place. And then from the article that we looked at earlier in the presentation about 18 things that white people should think about when discussing racism are these topics. So things like the black-white wealth gap, redlining, white flight, subprime mortgages and how they affect Black families, discriminatory sentencing practices, occupational overcrowding, workplace discrimination, mandatory minimum sentences, and in-school segregation. These are all topics that are really at the root of a lot of the, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of the discrimination that we see in our country and how it affects Black people. Another thing that, oh, go ahead, Blair.
So thinking about as we transition to being back at school, whether that means for you that you're back virtually or in person or some combination of both, planning a back to school activity for your class that offers students a safe space to reflect on racial justice and collective pain. Beginning to build a classroom community where students can have these conversations and revisit them as new events arise. Building relationships with students is key to be able to have these conversations. And as somebody who has always worked in a middle school, like students absolutely know when you're full of shit. So if you aren't prepared to go into these conversations, and if you aren't knowledgeable, and if you aren't confident, and if you aren't really willing to see and to hear your students, they know it. And so really making sure that you're doing the work over the summer to be able to foster these conversations with your students and facilitate these conversations with your students when you're back in the building. And the Black Lives Matter Week of Action curriculum guide has ideas to do activities like that, as is the resource guide that we put together.
And this is just on your screen right now. You can see the resource guide. One of the things that I think is important is just kind of a framing that you can use when you're having a conversation with students, like what is happening and why do you think it's happening? Give them time to talk about that. Listen to how they're feeling and what thoughts that they're having, because even kids, a friend of mine last night said that her 5-year-old, who was a Black biracial kid, was having trouble going to sleep because he was afraid that he was going to get killed by police. Sorry. So even the littlest kids are hearing and understanding this. And it's important that we be able to talk to them.
In addition, we have a couple of colleagues that have put together the Philadelphia Hub for Liberatory Academics, which is a great resource to check out. Clarice is going to click on it so you can just get an idea. And that lesson is linked, or those resources are linked in the guide.
And they have lots of great virtual lessons that you could put up on your Google Classrooms over the summer so that your students could be engaging with them even while we're not in school.
And then we also linked some places where folks can donate. We linked 2 Philadelphia organizations, but I'm sure that there are organizations in your city or your town that you can contribute to. There are ways and suggestions to get physically active and out if you're able to do so. The Black Lives Matter Facebook page and website is sharing all of the events that they are co-sponsoring at all of their different like city or state groups throughout the country. And we really just want to lift up the idea about getting active. These conversations are a great and necessary starting point. Book clubs are a great and necessary starting point. But we're hoping that everybody is moved from what they're learning to some sense of action, and whether that be action in your workplace about figuring out ways to interrupt conversations with colleagues that are saying things that are problematic, or to petition an administrator to change a school policy that you believe is inherently racist or disproportionately impacting students of color. If you're somebody who is able to go and speak at a school board, if this is a systematic issue in your district, if you're somebody who can send an email to a city council person, and not one of those just copy and paste your name in, because they filter those out, all of them. But writing a quick personal email, even if it's a sentence or 2, is always better than copy and pasting something that is provided. And then thinking about ways to just continue to support your students. I know that everybody is in a different school setting. I had a conversation with a colleague this morning who is Black and whose Black children attend a predominantly white school. And I think that that is its own challenge within itself, to kind of conquer these conversations in a space where the general population of those schools might not be welcoming to it. And continue to try to find like a teacher tribe or a group of teachers in your area or your neighborhood or your school or virtually that you can have these conversations with and plan with. Because as much as you can do as one person, if you are a group of people with similar ideas that are willing to work towards something, it is possible to get a whole lot done. I know that in the past couple of years, Clarice and I in the group that we work with have had so many wins with the school district of Philadelphia specifically that we didn't think several years ago were possible. everything down from them sharing this resource guide with the whole district to allowing us to facilitate trainings like this on a district level, to being open to meeting with us and getting our insight. And so these things are possible everywhere. The School District of Philadelphia is a very large district and can be a lot to tackle. And so I feel like if we can do it here, and then there's hope everywhere. One question in the chat box is, any ideas for finding like-minded teachers to collaborate with in one's district? I know that there are Bar We reading groups that are kind of like set in multiple districts, and I feel like that information might be available. I'm not sure, Clarice, if you know that.
Yeah, so the Bar We information, we do have a link for them at the end, but I think whether you're doing a Bar We reading group or you've chosen like an article that you would like to look at, right now people are at home a lot, and so I think putting a Zoom on like your local teacher Facebook and asking if people want to read an article with you or interested in having a book group this summer could be a really good way to find like-minded individuals.
Great, and so we want everybody just to be able to share a takeaway if they're interested in doing so. So feel free to use the raise hand feature and share a takeaway. And then we do have a short survey that we're gonna ask you to complete. We are people who enjoy honest feedback. We wanna make sure that the time that we are taking of people's is beneficial and that they find it to be meaningful. And so we are always seeking authentic feedback. And then we're gonna just share some contact information with you. And we will likely be done a little bit before 2:30. So feel free with the raise hand feature if there's a takeaway you want to share, and I will call on you. Right, Nick, to start, please.
Hey, thank you all so much. This has been super useful for me. I would say that my takeaway is after watching the Bettina Love interview, I noticed that that was a very concrete example of what white co-conspirators can do to leverage whiteness and privilege. And as a teacher of African American history, I cover some historical examples of that. But I realize it's super important to cover contemporary, current examples of that. And I teach at a school that's 1/4 white, and I need to be able to provide those examples for my white students so that they can imagine for themselves what that can look like. So I really appreciate that example, and I'm looking forward to kind of, adjusting my curriculum moving forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Nick. Ellie?
Yeah, I would just like to thank you guys for hosting this, because I think I am in the same boat as other people, non-racist, trying to move towards anti-racist, and I work in a predominantly Black school district, and I'm a school counselor, so I'm new to the role. I've been a counselor for 1 year, but it's really exciting to gain all of these resources, and I thank you guys for taking the time today, because I learned a lot about, I've already subscribed to the summer reading groups and got some of these books on order. So I just really appreciate this group and you guys taking the time, and the other people on here being vulnerable to share, because I share a lot of the sentiments that you guys have shared. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellie. Elizabeth?
I think a takeaway for me is that the one slide or something said about talking to your students about race, like very early in the year, and opening up that conversation. I know I started doing that just by doing like an identity circle, and I teach high school math. So I just think it's really important for like not just social studies teachers or not just like humanities teachers to be having these conversations. And like you said, Blair, like kids see your BS like a mile away. So just being real with them and being like it's no secret that I'm a white woman, guys. Most of you are not white. So like, let's just put it right out in the open, and being there for your kids, because stuff does happen throughout the year. And if you have those conversations early on, then the space is already established that like this is a safe place to talk about issues around race and what's happening and what we see in the news.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that it's incredibly important that students feel authentically that you're on their side and that you're fighting for and advocating for them, that you're standing with them, and that they know that their teachers are people that they can trust in the school building. So thank you for sharing that. Jordan?
Yeah, I have a lot of takeaways, I think, as we all do from this. But the big one for me is kind of the way that you set this up of defining racism, identifying it, and then like how you can act, because I think that's just a helpful framework even when I'm going to be approaching conversations with colleagues, to not just start talking about it, but almost like having a structure in my head in which to approach it and some language for that. So I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Something that I've noticed is that it's much easier to have conversations when there's a common and understood language, where words are very like clearly defined for everybody taking part in the conversation. So absolutely, thank you for sharing that.
I also think that sharing the definitions takes some of the emotionality out of it. Like, I think when people hear the word racist, especially white people, they're like, I'm not a racist. I would never hurt a black person. But show it, like sharing that non-racist versus anti-racist language and making it just very simple, I have found to be very helpful, even in my own family.
Yeah, and even the like equation, the white supremacy plus privilege plus power, and just making it like almost mathematical in that sense.
Dawn?
Sorry, I have a child. I want to thank you. I know. I want to thank you. I'm going to turn off my video. I want to thank you for the idea of we have to, you never quite arrive, that it's a continuous journey and process. And I teach theater, and I teach in a sense that, I need you to take her, thank you. I teach in a sense that we don't, I apologize for that. That
you're fine.
Thank you. That when you act, it's never a state of being. You do something to your scene partner, it's an action. There's an active role that you take as a performer. And the idea of we never arrive, that it's a constant journey and we are constantly not acting, but taking action and making choices. And I really, really appreciate that. That when we commit to do this, it's for the long swim.
That I know that Clarice and I have had several conversations between ourselves where we joke about people who just like keep waiting for their I'm not a racist certificate to arrive in the mail after like all of their book clubs and professional development. And so thank you for noting that. It definitely is something that is an ongoing personal work that continues to be done over and over. We have a couple more people who want to share, but I do just want to pop the survey into the chat box for everybody. So if we're going to hear from these people, but if you wanted to get started on that, feel free. If we could hear from Dawn. No, Dawn?
That was me, and I said my piece. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
It didn't take down my hand, sorry.
Alexis.
Hello, hopefully you can hear me. So first of all, thank you so much for doing this. I work in a virtual school, as in virtual pre-COVID. And so racial issues have never really, I have not personally experienced students suffering from racial issues within the classroom setting. And I have realized over the last few weeks that it is probably something that is, that impacts them a lot more than I would think, and that I need to be doing a better part to ensure that our students are that they are processing this in the best way possible. I also, I've always thought, that it wasn't okay for me as a white female to speak about racial issues and to be that voice, because I am not Black and I've never experienced racism in that sense. But I've also learned through this that I need to be an active participant in ensuring that, my coworkers are not racist and are not, instilling those views into our children, and that I can speak up. So I'm very thankful for that.
Thank you for sharing. So it doesn't seem like anybody else has their hand raised. I did put the survey, which is a Google form, in the chat box. It's also written out on the slide as a bit.ly short link. On the slide is also Clarice's email address and my email address, as well as all of the places on social media that you can find out more information about the Racial Justice Organizing Committee.
And we're going to send this slideshow out to everyone, as well as a video. And you will be able, there are links throughout of a lot of the things that we talked about, as well as a lot of the resources that we've used today.
Yes, and if you haven't added anything to the Padlet, I know that for me sometimes it's hard to type while I'm also trying to listen to something, but if anything resonates with you, I'll leave that open until end of day today. Like sometime tonight, I'll then download it to send it out to everybody. So feel free to keep that open and add on to that as you come across things that you might want to add. And we just really want to thank you for taking time today. I know for us, our last day of school was yesterday, and we were concerned that people wouldn't want to join the day after, like keep doing work the day after their last day of work. And so we were really happy to see how many of you wanted to join us. And so we thank you, and we're available should you need anything, or feel free to reach out.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming, and we are available. We hope we hear from you.
Thank you.